Russia's Putin proposes joint bonds for SCO members. Trump calls US-India trade relations a totally one-sided disaster. And ECB's Lagarde warns against undermining the independence of US Fed. Welcome to the Economic Bulletin. We start off with Europe, where Bank of England data has revealed that British lenders approved that most mortgages in July since January, which added to signs of a stabilization in the housing market after volatility caused by the end of a tax break. Banks and building societies signed off on 65,352 mortgages during the month. The BOE data also showed stronger than expected increases in mortgage and consumer borrowing during July. Consumer borrowing rose by 7% in the 12 months to July, the biggest such increase since the 12 months to October 2024. Mortgage lender Nationwide Building Society has said that British houses prices unexpectedly fell in August as buyers struggled to afford high valuations. Property prices slipped by 0.1% last month from July. Nationwide said the third month-on-month fall since April, when a tax break expired for buyers of many lower value homes. Compared with 12 months earlier, prices in August were up by 2.1%, the joint weakest rate of growth since June of the last year. Prices were rising by almost 5% in annual terms at the end of last year, ahead of the end of the stamp duty land tax exemption. And moving on to Asia, where data from the Census and Statistics Department has shown that Hong Kong's retail sales by value risen by 1.8% in July from a year earlier, the third consecutive month of gains, and its government said consumer sentiment should remain steady. Sales rose to 29.7 billion Hong Kong dollars after a 0.7% increase in June compared with the same month a year before. In volume terms, July retail sales increased 1% from a year earlier. For the first 7 months of 2025, the value of the total retail sales declined by 2.6% compared with the same period in 2024, and volume fell 4.0%. The Indian government has revealed that it collected 1.86 trillion rupees as goods and services tax in August, a 6.5% higher than the same period last year. On another note, Reuters reported that India is planning to cut consumption tax by at least 10% points on nearly 175 products, ranging from shampoos and hybrid cars to consumer electronics. It also noted that consumer electronics like air conditioners and televisions could see rates drops from 28% to 18% ahead of the Diwali shopping season starting in October. Still in Asia, Japan's finance ministry has reported that the country's corporate spending on plant and equipment climbed 7.6% in the second quarter. Despite this healthy rise, the outlook for business investment is clouded by U.S. tariffs, which have caused an 11.5% tumble in recurring profits from manufacturers, led by a steep 29.7% plunge for automakers. This has prompted analysts to predict a downward revision of Japan's second quarter GDP, with some even forecasting a contraction in the third quarter. Customs data has shown that South Korea's export growth in August slowed more than markets had anticipated, as tariffs sent U.S. bond shipments tumbling to their sharpest decline since the COVID-19 pandemic. Exports from Asia's fourth largest economy rose 1.3% from the same month last year to $58.40 billion. Shipments to the United States fell 12.0%, dragged down by automobiles, machinery, and steel. Exports to China also fell 2.9% to August, but those to Southeast Asia jumped 11.9%. Imports fell 4.0% in August to $51.86 billion after rising 0.7% in July. The monthly trade balance stood at a surplus of $6.51 billion, narrower than the previous month's $6.61 billion. On the Shanghai Cooperation Organization SCO Plus Summit, Russian President Vladimir Putin has proposed that members of the 10-nation organization should sell joint bonds, a step that would mark a major deepening of their economic cooperation. He also floated the idea of a joint payment system for trade settlements. Putin supported the creation of a shared payment system, settled the depository infrastructure, and the formation of a bank of joint investment projects. Putin further noted that it will increase the effectiveness of economic exchanges and protect member nations from fluctuations in the external environment. He noted that the SCO economies had grown on average by 5% in 2024.
Некоторые страны по-прежнему не отказываются от стремления к диктату в международных делах. Россия поддерживает.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi stated that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization can be a guiding light for multilateralism and an inclusive world order. He also noted that India believes strong connectivity is crucial for fostering not only business but also trust and development.
SCO, multilateralism और inclusive world order का मार्गदर्शक बन सकता है। मुझे खुशी है कि इस महत्वपूर्ण विषय पर आज एक स्टेटमेंट जारी किया जा रहा है। यह खुशी की बात है कि SCO भी समय के अनुरूप इवॉल्व हो रहा है। ऑर्गेनाइज्ड क्राइम, ड्रग ट्रैफिकिंग और साइबर सिक्योरिटी जैसे समकालीन चुनौतियों से निपटने के लिए 4 नए केंद्र बनाए जा रहे हैं। हम इस रिफॉर्म ओरिएंटेड माइंडसेट का स्वागत करते हैं।
India's Narendra Modi has told Vladimir Putin that India and Russia stood side by side even in difficult times. Putin and Modi further praised relations between the two countries on the sidelines of the two-day meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization regional bloc. Putin addressed Modi as his dear friend and said relations were developing dynamically.
Многоуровневое взаимодействие. Торгово-экономическая кооперация в целом демонстрирует положительную динамику. Развивается туристический обмен. Мы тесно координируем наши усилия на международной арене.
For further analysis, we're joined from London by CEO of QW Capital, Gianluca Labuafello. Welcome to Qnews Economic Bulletin, sir. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and thank you for your time. Sir, how can enhanced economic integration among Russia, China and India within the SCO framework transform inter-regional trade volumes and diversify their export-import portfolios, sir?
Yeah, good evening. It's actually a quite current problem for the whole world, not for this part of the world of the country or part of the SCO, because as you remember, there has been established already a development bank there, proposing counter offer versus the World Bank, versus the organization that's been set up after World War II. So it kind of saying the signal they want to give is that we are going towards a new equilibrium, a new paradigm. We had a shift after World War II from a UK-centered world, financial world, where the British pound was kind of the reference for the reserve currency, global reserve currency, to an order that was dollar-centric before with the Bretton Woods agreement, and then with the petrodollar under Kissinger, under Nixon administration, where Kissinger was the head of State Department, so the Foreign Office. But in reality, now we are seeing another change where there is an important part of the South called Global South, or you call it BRICS, extended, because BRICS started with 7 members, now they are 17 members. But clearly, we are having now a big part of the world who is big in terms of number of people, in terms of GDP, in terms of resources, because we are talking about a huge part of the oil production, so energy production, and on top of that, or for the rare earth material that, as you know, are essential for all the technological development of GPU, graphic card, anything that is needed, so the backbone for all the new technological advancement in artificial intelligence. So this global south, these countries that are related to the SCO, represent a real threat for a new equilibrium. So this is a further confirmation that we're going towards a multipolar world. So not necessarily a new polar that replaces dollar and the US, but a world that it doesn't be centered on one single polar, so the US and the dollar, but multipolar world.
Sir, what role could SCO-led infrastructure projects, such as those aimed at improving connectivity and energy cooperation, play in boosting economic growth and regional development, sir?
Is actually key, because think about the simple reason why Modi, even though he was threatened for a 50% tariff for all the export into the US, decide not to retaliate on one side because he want to leave a ajar, an open door with the US, but on the other side, he didn't give up or didn't accept the condition of the US to lift this tariff that was not import anymore Russian oil. The answer has been, we're going to keep importing Russian oil. So the SCO, that is a kind of more structured organization to support the Belt and Road Initiative from China. So basically all the development of all the funding by the China government from Far East Asia to all Africa is actually based, one of the main line are energy distribution, energy construction, and energy exchange. So it's actually key. This point on energy is key.
How might the economic collaboration within the SCO influence global currency dynamics, including reducing dependence on the US dollar for trade settlements, sir?
Yeah, this is already not something that we forecast, it's something we are observing. Over the last year at least, most of these countries, China, India, Saudi, part of the Gulf countries are already, and Russia of course, are all exchanging oil, no longer settling in dollar, but in local currency, being yuan, being ruble, and actually so there is already happening. We're talking about almost 25 to 30% of the oil transaction at the moment today are settled no longer in US dollar.
To what extent can the SCO facilitate alternative financial mechanisms, for example, development banks, payment systems that could provide new models for funding and investing beyond traditional Western financial institutions?
Yeah, so there are two lines on this. One is, as you say, the funding. So basically meaning that if there is not exchange in dollar, the exchange in another currency, the country who is selling the energy product, for example, in this case, Russia, doesn't need to invest into US dollar. So the basically means doesn't need to invest into US dollar denominated asset, call it US Treasury. So this will have a direct impact on the demand for US Treasury from the US government. On the other side, this country that the link, let's say, supported by the SCO, is exploring a possibility to replace the SWIFT payment. So we're not talking about now just an investment, a funding of the US debt in specific cases, but they're even talking about a completely different payment, not just not using dollar, but using a completely different new payment system that's an alternative to SWIFT. And this is interesting because obviously I'm not saying it's good for us from the Western world, but definitely something we have to consider. This will increase volatility at macro level. Geopolitical and macro level volatility will be much higher than what we have seen since the great financial crisis, for sure.
Sir, this will will this be when demand with the demand on the US dollar, will it decrease, sir, thus making the US dollar, sir, in return decrease as well, and the price of the US dollar decreases?
Now, let's make these things clear. At the moment, the US dollar dominance is not in jeopardy. The vast majority of the international transactions being against energy or other products are settled in US dollar. So dollar is not at the moment challenged as a global reserve currency. But if up to 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 100% of the transactions were settled in dollar, they are now less than 100. Call it 95, call it 90. Now the question is not the current level of the transactions who are not settled in dollar, but the dynamic. We are seeing a decreasing dynamic, and it's very difficult to argue that we may see a change in the trend, so that the dollar will reconquer what it lost in terms of percent of transaction. It will still be, at the moment, the main reserve currency, the global reserve currency, the currency on which all the transactions are settled in, but at the moment it's no longer 300%. And if I had to guess, over the next 10 years, I would see this decreasing, not increasing.
Sir, how could the combined innovation capacity and industrial strengths of Russia, China, and India within the SCO context drive shifts in global manufacturing and technology supply chains, potentially affecting global economic competitiveness?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually related to what we had on the 26th of January this year. That has been a big wake-up call. When the DeepSeek algorithm came to be known in the world, up to that day, Sunday the 26th of January, we were expecting that the gap in terms of advancement from a technological perspective of the US versus the whole rest of the world was very, very evident, was very difficult to recoup from the other countries. Whereas when we saw what happened with the DeepSeek, that was a more efficient algorithm, was less consumer demanding, so it shows us there is an alternative. Obviously, the SCO has all the interest to funding this, and now that's a big question. Are this going to accelerate the catching up of China and all the SCO country from a technological perspective versus the US, who on the other side is reducing its funding to university? That, don't forget, the Silicon Valley success is strongly related to university research. So Stanford, Berkeley, all the West Coast, and as well in the East Coast, but mostly the West Coast. So if we got a question of that the US administration is pushing forward of reducing funding to US universities, so questioning their role as research. On the other side, we have a unlimited funding or huge funding from the SCO versus the technological research in Asia, specific in China. That's a big question. That's a big challenge.
Sir, how might the SCO's economic cooperation impact global energy markets, considering the region's significant reserves, and what implications could this have for energy pricing and security worldwide?
Yeah, I don't see necessarily at the moment an impact on energy price. So I'm not seeing future on oil being massively impacted. At least on the midterm, we can have a very short-term volatility event, but not necessarily on the impact. This is much more driven by supply demand. I doubt we can have a repeat of the 74 energy crisis where part of the world we just close the tab and won't allow energy providing. That I doubt, even because today we have US that is independent from an energetic point of view. So I doubt we eventually gonna see a squeeze from part of the world in terms of supply of energy that could have a huge shock on energy price, but definitely there will be geopolitical implications that are very difficult to foresee at the moment. But again, the fact that there is a part of the world who is nice saying we want to have a polar to the unipolar world. We don't want to think all in terms of your rule, your decision, your currency, call it dollar, but we want to have the new currency, a new kind of settlement, a new payment system. This has a huge geopolitical implication. It's not just financial.
Okay, sir, in 10 seconds because I have to wrap up now. Sir, why does Trump call US-India trade relations a totally one-sided disaster, and why is he so bothered?
I mean, I will always take with the pinch of salt whatever Trump says on a specific press conference. We know how is his way of doing the art of deal. So I would rather focus with Trump, focus on what he does, not on what he says.
From London, that was CEO of QW Capital, Gianluca Lobafello. Thank you very much for your insights, sir, and for your valuable time. Thank you very much for your informative knowledge. And back to our news and still in global alliances. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to view each other as development partners rather than rivals. The meeting took place on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, marking the first time Modi has visited China in 7 years. The renewed diplomatic push is seen as a strategic realignment for both countries amid rising global tensions and the threat of trade wars. The meeting took place just days after the US imposed new tariffs in India, partly in response to its continued purchases of Russian oil. For further analysis, we're joined from Mahashatra by Assistant Professor at National Law University, Vaini Kumar. Welcome to Qnews Economic Bulletin, sir. Sir, how do recent geopolitical and economic trends between China and India influence the trajectory of their bilateral relationship?
Hello. Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you? You didn't hear the question. I'll repeat it again. How do recent geopolitical and economic trends between China and India influence the trajectory of their bilateral relationship, sir?
As far as the trade between India and China is concerned, it is far less when compared to any other country because of the border conflicts between India and China. And because of the the border dispute that was prevailing from 1960s onwards, there was a very less, there was very less trade that was registered between the two countries. It was hardly around $15 billion of trade that is taking place between India and China today. But considering the tariffs of the United States, which are imposed by the President of the United States, that is Donald Trump, there may be major push for the trade between India and China because the recent exchange of dialogues between the foreign ministers and the secretaries of the different departments of India and China and the recent visit of the foreign minister of China to India. All these factors may contribute towards the boosting of the economic relationship between India and China in the near future. Uh, you know, there might the Russian intervention to resolve any kind of disputes between India and China. Of course, India would not be ready to accept the mediation of any third party between the relations between the two states. But even then, considering the SCO and the meeting between the Prime Minister of India and the President of United States, the President of the China, and the
President of
President
Russia, sir.
of Russia, it have a positive. It will be having going to have a positive impact. Let us hope for the best. As far
Perfect,
as
sir.
the
Got your
economic
point, sir. How do the recent geopolitical and economic developments between China and India shape their bilateral relationship and regional influence?
The bilateral relationship between India and China are dictated by the border disputes between the two states. So, in case of the economic cooperation between two states, accelerating between two states, from 1962, when the war between India and China has taken place, uh, there was not so much bilateral, economic trade between the two states. But later on, keeping aside the bilateral, the boundary disputes between India and China, and moving ahead with the economic cooperation between the two states, there is a huge potential for the bilateral trade between India and China, because China is the largest, China is the second largest populous country, and India is the largest populous country in the world, and both are the Asian big brothers, we can say, and both are going to, one of the top five economies of the world. So, in fact, there is a huge scope for the bilateral trade between India and China, especially economic aspects are concerned. Uh, Considering the tariffs of the United States, there might be a push uh, for the economic cooperation between the states, which in fact make the relation between India and China, the bilateral relation between India and China, to take a new turn from now, uh, because uh, because if you look at China, it is now controlling the EV industry. It is controlling the battery industry, which is going to drive the economy of the different states in the near future. So it is we see a positive trend, bilateral relationship between India and China, especially after the Trump in arbitrary decisions to impose tariffs on India.
True, sir. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your intake, and of course, I got your intake. I'm from Maharashtra. That was assistant professor at National Law University, Veni Kumar. Thank you very much for your insights and valuable knowledge, sir. And now we move on to the latest developments from the United States. U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized the U.S.-India trade relationship, calling it a totally one-sided disaster. In a Truth Social post, he claimed India benefits greatly by exporting massive amounts of goods to the United States, while high Indian tariffs historically blocked American companies from selling in India. He also noted India's reliance on Russian oil and military purchases. Although he acknowledged India has now offered to eliminate these tariffs, Trump called the move too late. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde has warned that any attempt to remove Federal Reserve officials like Chairman Jerome Powell or Governor Lisa Cook would seriously endanger global economic stability. She stated that undermining the independence of U.S. monetary policy would have a very worrying ripple effect on the world's largest economy and the rest of the world. She also warned that such a development would seriously endanger economic stability. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin. Here's what we have been covering. Russia's Putin proposes joint bonds for SCO members. Trump calls US-India trade relations a totally one-sided disaster. And ECB's Lagarde warns against undermining the independence of US Fed. This concludes our economic bulletin. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EG to stay informed. Thank you very much for watching and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.